You're listening to Colourful Breakfast with me, Loanna Morrison, and it's a cold morning out there. And we have with us Resham Kotecha. How do you pronounce your name?
Resham Kotecha. That was right.
Where is that from?
Well, originally I'm from India, my family heritage.
And you're the PPC for Dalit and West Norwood, right?
I am indeed, yes. Lovely constituency. Very lucky to be representing it.
Yeah. How did you get into politics?
So I started working in Parliament nearly 3 years ago now as a researcher for a baroness who also got me involved with an organisation called Women to Win, trying to promote more women in Parliament. And I also worked for the Conservative Friends of International Development. And then I switched over to the House of Commons, where I now work as an economic advisor. So I've really seen how politics works and on the inside.
On the wrong side.
No, the right side, definitely.
So how long will you sort of do this, the practicing bit before you go for a safe seat?
Well, obviously, I'll see how this seat goes. You never know what might happen on May the 7th. And then, I'll see where I'm best suited to and where they want me.
Right.
And then go there and do my best.
Great stuff. All right, so you're going to do the papers for us this morning. What are the headlines
Yes,
saying?
I am. So I think the obvious big one to go with as a first story is the Davani case. So we've now seen that Shreen Davani has had his court case thrown out against him. It's covering most of the papers, actually. And, such a big story that's, really piqued the public interest. And I think that'll be a really difficult one, as her family have said that it's the fact that with the case being thrown out, they'll now never hear the truth. And it's not that he's been cleared. It's just that there were so many inconsistencies in witness testimony that they've just decided that it's not a trial that can go ahead. So I think that's very sad for all involved, given that the truth won't be able to come out now. So that's the main story dominating all the papers. We obviously also see a lot about the Kate Middleton and Prince William Princess Catherine. The Duke and Duchess even. Can't get my names right this morning. The Duke and Duchess over in New York seem to be creating a great storm over there. Very popular. I think maybe America's going to consider its own royal family the way they love ours.
Yes.
So she's doing a great job. I mean, obviously dominating the papers. They all love her. So I think that's fantastic that she's doing they're doing their whirlwind trip to represent the UK over there. And I think the other thing that's really big on the papers is about how we're having to import staff from other countries. I mean, you read the front page of the Daily Mail, we're importing brickies for £1,000 per week. So maybe I'm in the wrong career now.
Yeah, I think I need to go and do something to
yeah,
brickies.
Both of us. It's amazing to hear that on the one hand, people complain about not having jobs, although unemployment has obviously fallen roughly by a third over the last few years. But the fact is we do need to consider what skills people are getting and where they're most suited. So, perhaps more vocational courses, encouraging young people to do that, because obviously we need to look at where the demand is coming from. I guess that's the argument for allowing free movement of labour right there.
Well, that's just it. I think that's that argument is, it's going round and round, just like the problem with unskilled labour. If you import unskilled labour and you ignore the indigenous labour, then by the time you need some more people, you have to go back to outside to get them again.
Exactly.
And so the people in this country continue to languish on the floor. And so for me, that no, it's the argument is not to bring in more labour. It's to make sure everybody in this country is, ready to do
and able
something.
To work. Yeah, and I think we have seen things changing with apprenticeships and stuff, because I think until recently there'd been a lot of focus on having to go to university and get that sort of qualification, whereas actually we're seeing a lot of skills gaps in the more kind of vocational training that we hadn't been focused on until recently. And I think the good thing with apprenticeships is maybe not right away. It does take a few years, obviously, to train up, but hopefully in the next few years we'll see a new generation of people coming through who do have those skills, so that we don't have to rely on constantly plugging the gap by going overseas, and that will mean people here can work.
They're making the same mistake there as well, because young people, the apprenticeship schemes, which is fantastic. I did an apprenticeship fair in South London, and they're now 2 million. Vince Cable is about to announce that we've hit the 2 million mark for apprenticeships, which is absolutely great. But they're making the same mistake again, and which comes on to what you've just said. They only seem to want apprentices to be in that qualified strata where either, if you didn't go to university, then you went into an apprenticeship. But the original reason for having apprenticeships was to give the people below who could not go to apprenticeship, who could not go to university or polytechnic, but who could get a skill, to get it through practical training on an apprenticeship scheme in a job. But they now are completely left out of the equation because they're trying to equate apprenticeships to university education, university qualifications.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think you're right. And I think, obviously we do need to be sure we're attracting the right people. And I think if you looked at the autumn statement last week, George Osborne has now said that, employers won't pay national insurance on any apprentice under 25. So I think that should help the problem and encourage more people to hire youngsters as apprentices. But I think the other point is that as a kind of country, our attitude to vocational work is not the same as in other countries. If you look at Germany, for example, it's normal for people to be impressed if you're doing an apprenticeship, if you're doing a vocational skill, if you're involved on that side of things, people are impressed by it. Whereas here, we still tend to treat it as something that you do if you can't make university.
Exactly.
And I think, these skills are so valuable to our economy and we need them.
Yes.
So I think actually we also need to change our attitudes where it's not, oh, you can't go to university, therefore do an apprenticeship. It's you can do whatever you want to do. And apprenticeships
you've got lots of choices.
Exactly. Yeah. Apprenticeships should be as beneficial and as well respected as university.
I tell you, plumbers earn the most amazing amount of money.
Yeah, definitely.
As you know, when you have to call one.
And now bricklayers £1,000 a week,
It's just incredible, isn't it? And why do you... And then people complain constantly that, we're bringing in workers. But the workers, the British workers themselves, they're not getting up and going out there and grabbing things either, because they've been so mollycoddled and they're so used to sort of, or things, if I can't get the job that I want, then I'll just go on some benefits. But that's changing because now the choices in taking benefits have been totally reduced.
Definitely.
So it's now your last resort because this government's introduced so many initiatives where a job is your first resort. And if you can't get that, then
the way it should be is that work always pays. It should always be your first option. And I think I'm very pro-welfare when it's really needed, but at no point should you be able to earn more on welfare than you do working because that's just the wrong incentive. We want to reward hardworking people.
Exactly.
So I think things like this, seeing that there are other options, that there really are training schemes available, apprenticeships available, regardless of your age, regardless of your qualifications. I think those things are really, really positive. And we are already seeing, in Dulwich and West Norwood, for example, unemployment has fallen 30% and youth unemployment has fallen 50%.
Yeah. A lot of young people are getting into work now.
Exactly. So, I think that's a really positive change.
Absolutely.
And the economy's growing again and trade is up. So I think all of those things will start to make a difference. But it's amazing front page news that, we are having to import a significant number of workers.
Okay, well, we'll go on to some more stories in a second after this break. Welcome back to Colourful Breakfast with me, Loanna Morrison, and with me this morning doing the paper review is Resham Kotecha, an economist by day as well as the PPC for Dulwich and West Norwood. And we're going to move on now to Let Them Eat Porridge, says the Independent. This story is, every week a politician gets, sort of caught out in some phraseology that's somehow against the lower classes or something like that. It's just like someone's waiting there to dissect each sentence uttered by a politician.
Well, I think that's the problem. You have to be so careful now because sound bites or things taken out of context, if it's not very clear what question you are answering, it can make it seem like you're saying something far worse than you actually were. So I think it's a shame that Baroness Jenkins been caught out with that because I know her very well and she actually does practice what she preaches. She grows her own food in her garden and cooks everything herself at home. So I think her point was people don't know how to cook. And this was in response to a kind of a paper review that said that poor people are struggling because they don't know how to cook and having to go to food banks and relying on more expensive food options. So I think her point was that in general, as a generation, we've lost the art of cooking, but if you do not have a lot of money, it matters more, I think is what she was trying to say from knowing her. But obviously it makes a better story this way. So, but I think it's an issue we need to address, as we were talking about earlier. As you said, back in the day, you used to learn how to cook at school, and we don't do that anymore.
No, we don't do that anymore. But the Independent is really going to town on this one, the quality, because also there's the champagne story about the Lords,
yes,
isn't there? And then there is the sort of food story, the breastfeeding story with Farage, and then there's Justin Welby has also been caught. Nobody can say anything in public anymore without someone trying to shut down the discussion in one way or the other with some kind of class war rhetoric. And then it says...
Yes, you're right. Well, it does make a more interesting paper story.
I'm not sure it is yet officially called Porridge Gate.
Well, let's not start that one.
But Baroness Jenkins' statement that poor people do not know how to cook and they should have cheap porridge for breakfast rather than expensive cereals has gained as much coverage as several gates of recent history. The Conservative peer later apologised for the remark made at the launch a report on food banks and said that she had merely meant to highlight the loss of culinary skills in general in the UK. The Guardian notes her words were in marked contrast to the conclusions of the cross-party report, which says structural issues such as benefit delays and cuts, coupled with low wages and rising living standards, are predominantly to blame for tens of thousands of families experiencing hunger. Well, it depends which part of the political divide you're on and how you interpret these figures and what it says. I mean, you can completely ignore one part of it.
I think I was only explaining her words. As far as it goes, yes, we have...
I mean the Independent.
Oh, the Independent, yes.
It's chosen where it wants to do what it wants to do, saying that what she thinks, what she says is bad, but what it says is good.
I know. I mean, I think obviously we do understand there's a problem. Prices are rising, and thanks to the recession, we've really struggled to see growth, even though employment's rising and the number of people with paid work is rising. We are now seeing real wages rise, which should really help with things, and obviously increases in the income tax threshold should help. But it has been a difficult time, and I think the awareness of food banks has risen too. So actually we're more aware, which is a really good thing that we are taking that into account.
Well, it's a transition. It's a transitionary phase, from the government implementing all its initiatives, as you say, like increasing personal allowance. They're still giving tax credits to people who are working. The welfare bill is like 164 billion, and I'll be discussing this later. So all these, and we have something like 160 charities in the United Kingdom, that helps people. So with the transition between the economy starting to grow and people starting to feel what they need to feel and earn what they need to earn, there is going to be this transition period when a lot of people may find themselves in a situation where they can't quite cope. Well, that is, the church and the food banks and people and volunteers, we're all doing what we're supposed to do. We're helping them through it.
Yes, exactly. And I think, that Anne raised a point in that no one of this generation really knows how to cook unless you took the time to learn from your parents or your family when you were younger. I mean, I know a lot of people my age don't come home and cook a healthy homemade meal. The easier option is to either go out for dinner.
And there's so many eating places now.
I mean, it's takeaway, microwave meals. Yeah. So, I understand it's the easier option, especially when you've worked a long day and you're tired. But I'm also aware it's not the cheapest or the most nutritious way to eat. So...
and it's quite right, because ready foods, and I mustn't give away all my 8 o'clock. They're telling me that they specifically help young people.
Yes, well, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, in the olden days, it makes me sound very old, but at school I learned to cook. And also we used to have families who were at home. We used to have mothers and mothers at home. So mothers would teach you how to cook. Now mothers are at work. So, she wasn't wrong. And also it wasn't just, she didn't make that remark off the top of her head. It was part of the commentary in the,
yes, definitely.
In the report. So, but for me, the main thing is, why do people want to shut down? Why does the left always try to shut down any kind of debate with a kind of class war?
Because it's easier than actually coming up with policy ideas, which we've seen them being rather short of lately. I think for me, the shame with political debates is that, if you come back with, instead of an actual response to the policy or an idea or an explanation, if you just come back with an attack on someone's ideology or someone's policy, or, you make it about, well, you don't understand, so we're going to ignore your ideas. I think that's a shame, and that stops useful debate, whether you agree or not. And I don't always agree with the people I'm debating with, but I think you have to respect the other side enough to listen, because that's the only way you can achieve a good solution at the end of it.
No,
if you just shut people down.
They want to divide. It's us and them. It's always us and them.
That's going to help them next year. So I understand why they're trying to do it, but I don't think it's conducive for people.
It has a resonance to a lot of people. Look at the Labour Party. Look how, they're leading the polls constantly. So this rhetoric must have a resonance somewhere. It's working. Because people do believe that there's a them and us, that all politicians are rich and that all rich people are nasty and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? This rhetoric that the left constantly throws out, and that the left-wing papers also do the same. It's like, there isn't a them and us. We're, everybody at some point or the other has a problem in their lives.
Yes, of course.
You don't end up at food banks. It's not just the poor that end up in food banks. If you have a debt, and a lot of people have debts right now, we know the amount of debt that people have. You can end up in that situation, whoever you are. So
actually, you saw before 2010, just before the recession started, you saw people able to borrow huge amounts of money that they couldn't pay back, thanks to the kind of, if I'm honest, reckless economic management of the previous government. And those are the people precisely who were able to borrow more than they could afford necessarily against their houses. And it's for that reason that people are really struggling now, because those debts have to be repaid at some point. And I think, it's important to understand that these things don't happen in 6 months or a year, but we're seeing the results of kind of the previous 5 or 10 years of mismanagement. And I think we're doing our best to get that back on track. But it's important.
Yeah, it's important. Well, we haven't finished yet. We're coming back with more stories after the break.
It's just the way you make me feel. And I always knew that you'd be the one to be my perfect lady.
Welcome back to Colourful Breakfast, and we're going through the morning's papers with my co-host here for this morning, Resham Kotecha. Oh, I got it right now.
You have got it right, absolutely.
It sounds very exotic when I get it right. So you have a story there for us on the wheelchair. Tell us about the wheelchair story.
Yeah, so this is something that I think will sadly affect a lot of people. Wheelchair users have no automatic right to occupy the designated areas for disabled people on buses, the Court of Appeal has ruled, which I think is crazy if you think about the fact that these are designated areas for disabled people, where disabled people or wheelchair users are now being told that's not your right to be able to put yourself there.
I think having a baby is, traveling around in a wheelchair is a bit of a disability too.
Yes, of course. No, I mean, well, at least if you have a baby in a pram, it's inconvenient, but you can fold up the pram and carry the baby. Whereas if you're in a wheelchair, you don't have any other options. So the ruling means that if you are in a wheelchair and you want to occupy that space, if a able-bodied person is sitting in that space, they don't have to move, and the bus driver can't tell them to. So I think given how much of a problem that could be for wheelchair users, we might see that impacting people's lives or ability to use public transport a lot.
Yeah, but the judge was right, wasn't it? It's a matter of common decency. I mean,
yes, well,
the people shouldn't have to be, there shouldn't be a law to say, out of common decency, if you see someone with a wheelchair, accommodate him, move out the way, do this, do that, whoever you are. Why should we have a law to tell us to do that?
Well, of course, I would be shocked if people didn't do that. Yeah. But I see it on my morning commute, where people on crutches or in wheelchairs or pregnant women, heavily pregnant women, are on the train. And I've already given up my seat or wasn't lucky enough to have one in the first place. And you see people studiously look away and try and ignore the problem. And I think, if you're on a bus and that happens, I think it's a sad fact that this did have to go to court, because obviously it's not happening enough and people aren't giving up seats. So it's a shame if that's the case, but
I don't think so at all. I mean, because every time I've been on bus, I've seen women, 3-4 women with, it's pouring down with rain, and they've got prams with small babies in and everything, and a wheelchair person comes along and they don't get on the bus. They can't get on the bus, and the bus is packed, and the next one is 10 minutes if you're in C10, and they have to wait there in the rain and allow someone in a wheelchair to get on the bus. And, out of common decency, you probably would do that because, well, he can't do a wheelchair and an umbrella, whereas you can, So it's all these things. But what I find amazing these days is, why do we have to have a law for everything? And the last government introduced 3,000 new laws when it was in power. And yet here we are, every day we're begging for a new law. One person has an upset and they go to the Court of Human Rights and start asking for a new law.
I think you're right. I think we have become a nation that takes everything to court far too easily. And you're right. I think 99% of people would give up their seats or space and understand. So I think it's a shame that anyone feels as though they have to take that to court. And, I'm sure the majority of people would give up their seats. But I think what this government is doing that's really good, obviously I was celebrating Small Business Saturday in my constituency and looking at what we're doing for small businesses. And we've actually got rid of thousands of procedures, red tape and legislation. And you look at the amount of legislation, as you said, that the previous government put in place, and you just think, why is it so difficult to trust people to do the right thing without having to be told? Because actually almost everyone is considerate and kind.
People want to do the right thing, but Alex Salmond looks like Alex Salmond will not be doing the right thing. Alex Salmond has refused to hand back a £65,000 golden goodbye, which he claimed from the taxpayer when he stood down as an MP, despite confirming he wants to return to Westminster. Resettlement grants are supposed to provide financial assistance to MPs leaving politics, but Mr. Salmond controversially accepted the money from the Commons authorities when he gave up his Banff and Buchan seat at the 2010 general election. So the decision provoked widespread criticism.
No amount of resettlement can keep him away, can it?
No, he will not leave politics. Every time he moves, it's because of he's playing out a strategic kind of plan.
It's just PR. It's just he comes and goes. When he manages to do something well, he celebrates it and stays. And when he can't achieve what he wants, he
moves back to another part of the
has a little temper tantrum, leaves, takes our money, and then announces he's coming back. And
no, but the whole point is he never leaves. When he left Westminster, he went to Scotland and became a member of Parliament. And when he left there, when he left that as a member of Parliament, he left it because he wanted to become the leader of the SNP. And now he's not I'm sure when he was running as leader of the SNP and he decided on the strategy of independence, he must have thought to himself, now, if I don't win, what am I going to do?
Of course.
Oh, I know, light bulb moment. I'll go back to Westminster as a member of Parliament.
I think the problem here is that, he said he was...
gravy merry-go-round.
Of course. And I think the problem is he's standing, he resigned from his position saying, I've done my best. It's time for someone else to take over. And if you look at the interview, his reasons for coming back, because he wants to represent Scotland in their fight to make sure devolution happens properly. And you think, well, so you resigned from your ministerial post, and now you're coming back, and he didn't stay away very long from that position. No. So I'm not sure how long we'll have to wait before he tries to go for his first minister position again.
I know. I mean, people have voted. They said they want to stay in the union. So why don't you just go away and do some gardening?
Well, it's an interesting question someone raised the other day. They said, how long do you think till he pushes for another referendum? Because as far as he's concerned, that's his, kind of raison d'etre in politics.
Is to break up the United Kingdom. I mean, that's
which would
great
be such
ambition,
a shame,
isn't it?
Yeah, well,
in the olden days, he would have been, he would have been had up for treason. So what else do we have in the pages?
So
today?
we've got. We saw a lot of talk about Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and we've now been able to see that how much the economy has recovered. That We had Manic Monday, coming up with some great names for these days. We had Manic Monday, where £520,000 was spent per minute online yesterday, which is obviously going to be a huge boost for the economy. So should be a great Christmas for retailers across the country.
Yes, it should be. Well, talking of back to politics for the last story here. UKIP star woman candidate quits over sex harassment, says The Telegraph. Natasha Bolter, a headline speaker at UKIP's party conference, has claimed General Secretary Roger Byrd tried to seduce her over dinner. So what was the dinner for? Most people go to dinner. If a man asks you out to dinner, you must expect to be.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he could have said, let's have a strategy dinner. They could have been campaigning. I think it's a shame that these kinds of things are still happening, where you feel as though as a woman in politics, you have to be careful what meals you accept. I mean, do you go hungry or?
Well, I mean, the normal rules of life do not suddenly stop when you become a member of parliament. If you're a woman and a man asks you out to dinner, generally there's something behind it.
Of course, well, yes, but I've been asked for a career chat by a certain MP, and that turned into an asking me out very quickly when I thought I was there to discuss politics. So, it depends how it's sold, but I think
they're always men, and you're always going to be women.
Well, there is that.
It's like saying, John from accounts, you know what he did? He asked me for a cup of coffee, and then he asked me to dinner.
How could John do that? No, I see your point, but I think, we have to be careful. We are trying so hard to get more women in Parliament that we don't want to make it difficult by making women feel as though they're there just to be eye candy.
Women should continue to remember that at the end of the day, they're still women. And they're still working with men. You can't sort of decide 1 minute that men are men and women are women, and at the other time go, well, I'm a politician now, I'm wearing a different hat, or I'm a secretary now, I'm wearing a different hat, so I'm no longer a woman.
Sure, no, I understand your point, but I just think if it's bad enough that you feel you have to resign over it, you should never feel that you can't stay in your job because you're being asked out. And, she's just said seduced. We don't know whether it was just a question or something a little bit more.
According to Ms. Bolter, 35, she received an indecent proposal from Roger Byrd, UKIP's General Secretary, on the day that he interviewed her to be a candidate. Well, that's different.
That's position of power as well. I think that's very wrong. If you think you're going for an interview to be a candidate and the next thing you know, you're being, receiving an indecent proposal, I'll put it the polite way.
Exactly. She shouldn't have resigned. She should have had him get them to get rid of him.
Yes,
you can't be selecting a candidate and put them in a position where if they don't accept your dinner, your
I think it was more than dinner.
It makes you feel as if you will lose that chance to become a candidate. That is an abuse of power.
Oh, definitely. But look at what the Lib Dems did with Lord Renaud. I mean, if I was a new woman going into politics and I felt as though they would react in the same way the Lib Dems did and not respond, then I'd probably resign too.
And that brings us to the end of the newspaper review this morning with my guest, Resham Kotecha.
Thank you for having me today. Well done.
It was great.